Hello guys and welcome back to FatbossTV, and today we're having a look at Odin in the Trials of Valor on the 7.1 PTR.
Yes, they've decided to test this instance at a little bit of a weird time because in the raid, you know, Emerald Nightmare's just about to come out on live servers, but nevertheless, we get to see some pretty cool bosses, and we start off with Odin, who is actually, you fight him in the last room in the Halls of Valor, just like you did in the 5-man dungeon, and instead of just fighting him, you also got Hyrja and Hymdall to fight, the two other, like, bosses that are in that instance. At the same time in phase 1. It's very, very cool. So this is a 3-phase fight, and it does use mechanics from the 5-man, but they like kind of put a little bit of a twist on each one to make it so it's a little bit different from what you faced in the 5-man.
So let's kick straight into it like we do with all these boss previews, and let's talk about the fight in phase 1. So in phase 1, you don't actually have Odin there. He is sort of doing stuff, but he's not in the encounter for you to target or deal damage to or anything like that. Instead, you have to deal with Hyrja and Hymdall first. Now, both of these mobs need to reach the 25% health threshold at the exact same time. The reason for this is that as soon as they hit this marker, they begin a cast that heals them for like an absolutely absurd amount. If they're both casting this ability at the same time, however, it will then just transition into phase 2 and they'll piss off and then they'll just watch you beat up Odin. So the idea is that you have both mobs next to each other and you just cleave the shit out of them. However, you can't do that.
No.
You're instead forced to put the mobs 35 yards away from each other because they both have an aura that reduces the damage that each of them take by 99%. So on the pool, you need both your tanks to spread them out and fight them on opposite sides of the room. Right, let's look at Hyrja first. So Hyrja has Expel Light, just like the 5-man version. It's a debuff that's on a single player, and when it expires, it deals a load of damage to them and anyone within their targeting circle. Unlike the 5-man, it doesn't jump to a new target. So this ability in itself in the raid feels pretty pointless. It does very little damage. It probably should jump to new targets, but for whatever reason while we were testing it wasn't. However, she isn't completely useless. She does have an ability called Shield of Light. What she'll do is just fixate a random player in your raid and send a massive beam of light towards them. It deals a ridiculous amount of damage and will almost certainly one-shot that player. However, the damage is split between all targets that stood inside the beam. So basically, if you get this beam, you're supposed to position yourself in such a way so as many people in your raid are hit by it as possible just to split the damage. We actually had our melee run into the beam. That sort of seemed to cover it most times, and it wasn't an issue. It just meant the range didn't have to run around all over the place. The other reason why we have melee sat on Hyrja the entire time is because Hymdall is still casting Horn of Valor. Just like the 5-man version, it just does AoE to everyone in the entire raid, but it also does splash damage, so you need to be spread out by 5 yards, but most importantly, it does extra damage to anyone that's within the targeting circle around Hymdall when it's being cast. So melee pretty much can't ever be on this boss without having to run out every single time this ability is cast. On top of this, he'll also do his Dancing Blades. Again, like the 5-man version, he'll just pick a target, throw it at them. It's the Spinning Blade of Death. You just need to make sure that you're not stood inside it. However, as the fight went on, he seemed to do this ability less and less. I don't know if that was a bug or maybe that's intentional, but it definitely feels like maybe this boss should be throwing out the blade way more than what he is now. So there are all the abilities from Hymdall. There's everything that you need to know about Hyrja. However, Odin, like I said, even though he is outside the encounter area, he is doing some other things. He's doing some pretty fucking impactful things. Occasionally, he'll light up all the runes in the room. There's 5 of them in total, just like you saw in 5-man. However, instead of you running into them and getting a massive buff, the boss will use the runes and amplify the damage he deals with a massive AoE attack 30 seconds after the runes become active. The more runes that are up, the more damage it deals, and it basically one-shots you if any of the runes are up. So you have to disable the runes. However, the only way that you can do that is by using these 5 adds that spawn. So as soon as the runes spawn, these 5 adds will run into the room, they'll fixate 5 random targets, and they'll run towards them. These players will gain a symbol above their head that matches with one of the runes on the floor, and what you need to do is you need to drag the add inside one of these runes and kill them off. Once they die inside the rune, it deactivates the rune and you continue the fight as normal. However, these adds don't take any damage whatsoever unless they're inside the rune, so you can't just clump them up beforehand and AoE them down and then move them into the right one. You have to immediately move as the player that's fixated, tank them inside the circle, and DPS need to jump off whatever targets they're on and kill the adds instead. And after you've managed to deal with that mechanic and all the other abilities that are going on from the 2 mini-bosses, and you've got them down to 25% health, that's when phase 2 will begin. They'll fly off and Odin will join the encounter.
So during phase 2, he will continue to activate the runes on the ground and spawn in the rune bearer adds, and you need to deal with this mechanic in the exact same way as you did in the first phase, otherwise once again you're just going to die from a giant AoE, but Odin himself does have some abilities that you have to deal with otherwise. For the tanks, you have to deal with a stacking attack speed buff that Odin gets every single time he melee attacks the same target, and this will just keep ramping up and up and up. The only way that you can reset this attack speed buff that he's getting is just by making him melee attack a different target. So you just need to taunt when he just starts annihilating one of your tanks, and just keep switching whenever you feel comfortable. For the rest of the group to deal with, there are 2 abilities that will seem very, very similar, one of which is the Spear of Light. So a spear will land on the ground, dealing a large amount of damage to anyone nearby, as well as sending out 5 orbs, and if you're hit by the orbs, you'll be stunned. These orbs weren't orbs.
Yeah, they're just little shitty boxes.
They're little checkered boxes. It kind of made the ability look a bit cute, if I'm honest, but it was broken as balls. But either way, move from the spear location when it lands and move out of the boxes or orbs, what happens to be there, when they're flying across the room. Now, Odin will also be shattering these spears, just like he did in the 5-man. So what happens is, he'll shatter them, all of them will blow up, and then all the orbs will go flying across the room, and you've got to try and dodge them all. However, this is slightly different in the raid version, because for every single spear that he shatters, it will do a burst of damage, unavoidable damage, to the raid. Now the thing is, he casts this ability so infrequently that when he does eventually cast Shatter Spears, there are so many spears up that you will just flat out get one shot. So what you need to do to counter this is actually shatter the spears yourself. What you can do with any of the Spears of Light that do land, you can run into them and they will explode. This will do a burst of damage to the raid, as well as send out some orbs just like Odin did, but you won't be doing it on 10 at the same time, you'll just be doing it one by one as you go through the encounter. So just to summarize, when the spears land, don't be anywhere near them, don't be anywhere near the orbs or boxes that fly out of them, and then just run into them to make sure you shatter them, so when Odin eventually shatters the spears, there are no spears for him to shatter and you don't die. And once he reaches 55% health, he'll transition into Phase 3.
Now in Phase 3, the boss will lose all of his abilities from Phase 1 and 2, meaning that you don't have to deal with the rune shit anymore. However, he will now just gain a completely new set of mechanics that you have to deal with. Now at the beginning of this phase, you'll see almost immediately that certain areas of the room will light up with Cleansing Flame on the ground. If you stand inside this Cleansing Flame, you take very high ticking damage and it will kill you very, very fast. So the idea is that you move into the sections of the room that are completely free and there's no cleansing ground whatsoever. As the fight goes on, these patches will change and different areas of the room will be coated, so you need to make sure you constantly move as soon as new sections become available. On top of this, the boss will also be marking several players with something called Storm of Justice. This simply just puts a circle around them and a debuff, and when the debuff expires, that player will explode, doing damage to anyone within the targeting circle, so it's very much like Expel Light, I guess, except you'll also spawn a tornado. Now if you get hit by this tornado, you get thrown up in the air and you're probably going to die because it deals a stupid amount of damage. Now these tornadoes aren't really difficult to deal with, but you really need to make sure that you put them in locations that isn't going to block your pathway when new cleansing ground locations come up. So we decided to always put them up against the wall, like as far away from the raid as possible, and we didn't really struggle too badly with it. Tanks in this phase, you have to deal with a brand new ability called Stormforged Spear. Now this is a debuff, again like every other debuff in this encounter. When it times out, it deals a shit ton of damage to you. However, the amount of damage it deals to you is based on how close you are to the boss. So as soon as you get the debuff, you need the other tank to taunt and you need to run as far away as you possibly can. We're talking 30 plus yards. The amount of damage this ability deals is absolutely mental. You probably want to rotate CDs, you probably want to use CDs from healers as well. Just anything you can get just to reduce the amount of damage you take from this. And also just to note, I guess it's not that important, but when it does finally hit you and the debuff runs out, you do a small amount of AoE damage to the raid as well, but it's nothing significant. And that's more or less it in this last phase, apart from the constant AoE ticking damage on the raid. And this is pretty much the enrage of this last phase. The damage just keeps ramping up and up and up. The boss just does random like chain lightning effects on certain people in your group, just random damage all over the place. And towards the end of the fight, when you get the boss to say like 13% health or 15% health, it really fucking hurts. Yeah. So you need to be really, really careful and just nuke the boss down as quick as you possibly can. And once you do hit the 10% mark, the fight's over, everything calms down, he fucks off and you get your loot. Yeah. So yeah, that's the encounter. So what do we think?
It is a very good encounter.
Yeah, I like
let's talk about Phase 3 because it's probably the freshest in our mind. I really like the way that Phase 3 plays out because it starts off pretty clean. Yeah, okay, you get this giant room and it's covered in holy light really, really quickly. And I gotta say, the holy light texture looks a little bit maybe unfinished at the moment.
It could be like feathered on the edges at least.
Yeah, it's a little bit shit looking at the moment, but it's PTR. There's fucking boxes flying around. It's what you expect. It's in testing form. So yeah, I really like that phase because it starts off a little bit clean. You kind of get used to the mechanics. Oh, okay, I'm spawning tornadoes. Oh, okay, we got to move from the circles on the ground. And then it's just like, oh god, there's like 50 tornadoes up. Oh god, the amount of ticking damage on the raid, it really ramps up the ante. And as you're getting him lower and lower to that 10% mark, it feels as it's getting more and more intense, which is great for a third phase, especially in such a long encounter. So yeah, I really do like that, and I really like the way that he changed up his 5-man abilities. The fact that, like, quite a lot of this is, like, you're seeing runes on the ground, you're seeing, like, Shield of Light, you're seeing Horns of Valor, which unfortunately doesn't spawn drakes. You know, you're seeing all of these abilities, but they've got a little bit of a twist on them, and you have to deal with them in a slightly different way. And it was nice seeing that. And considering everyone who is going to be going into this raid has probably done the 5-man dungeon, I think everyone's going to get that same sort of experience. Like, oh, I remember what to do with the runes. You just run into it, get the damage buff, and then you're like, oh no, it doesn't work that way. And with the spears, you're like, yeah, don't touch the spears. If you run into them, you just take damage.
And then your entire raid gets
and then you instantly get one shot, and you look through the dungeon journey, you're like, oh yeah, like, so stuff like that. That was really, really fun to see. One thing I've got to say though, talking about phase 2 and shattering the spears, is that phase was very, very repetitive. And it felt like it lasted a really long time because there's like no new overlaps or anything.
So the problem with that phase is that there is literally only 2 mechanics going on. There is spears landing, you blowing them up, the boss doing AoE damage to the raid, and then you dealing with the mechanic that you dealt with in phase 1 with the runes.
Yeah.
And the thing is with the spears, at least while we were testing it, when they exploded, the amount of damage they dealt to the raid wasn't all that bad. I mean, you could probably explode 3 spears, one after another, and your healers would keep up. And I think that's probably the biggest problem with that phase, that they made it so multiple spears spawn at the same time and maybe up the damage of it slightly. And then you had to blow up the spears in a certain time limit because, of course, the spear shattering is going to come at some point. Or maybe some spears you don't want to shatter and some you do. I think they could just mix it up. There feels like there needs to be some sort of diversity when it comes down to the pre-planning of smashing the spears, whereas right now there is none. It's, oh, a spear spawn, move out the way, then smash it. That's it. So phase 2, I agree with you. It does feel dull. The boss has a lot of fucking health as well, so I think that might be another reason why that phase does feel so long. So I definitely think they could improve phase 2 in one way or another, but like you said, phase 3 feels mental. It's, you know, quite intense. It's very engaging. Phase 1 is cool, having both bosses up at the same time. Just to point this out, on Mythic difficulty, in Phase 2, you have Hymdall and Hyrja up at the same time.
They'll be jumping in and out of the encounter or something like that.
While you're dealing with Odin's mechanics. So then, that on Mythic sounds exciting. But right now, Phase 2, it feels a bit dull.
Yeah, it is a little bit dull at the moment. But, the fight itself is a very, very weird first boss. Because this is the first boss in the instance, and it takes like 8 or 9 minutes. Well, it took us a long period of time. Maybe our damage was low, or maybe Odin's health was really high for PTR testing purposes. But it was a really long first fight, and it had loads of moving parts. And of course, normally first fights are Babby's first boss. You go in there and it's like, you know, like compare it to Immersius or Gruul and stuff like that. This boss has so many more working parts and so many like different phases and stuff like that. It's different, and I really like it. It feels like a little bit of an experiment to make a first boss maybe a bit more engaging and a bit more crazy when you go into it. So I really do like that aspect of it as well. But yeah, I think with a coat of paint and maybe a little bit more exciting stuff in Phase 2, this fight has a lot of potential to be an awesome encounter. And I really can't wait to fight it alongside Hyrja and Hymdall in Phase 2 as well, because that's going to be fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it will be. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little boss preview, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. And thank you very much to all our Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. You keep us in this job. And we shall see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.